Hello. Hey, what day is it? Yeah, it's Thursday. Okay. It's Thursday, and it's not quite 3 o'clock on the East Coast. I'm supposed to be doing CRM Playaz Thursdays at 3, but the Venerable Paul Greenberg is on the road. He's traveling back from the Zoho event. So, in lieu of not being able to do that, I was just very fortunate to call on one of my buddies to hang out with me for a few good minutes to talk about some stuff I am definitely interested in. And he is definitely the right person to talk to. And we're going to do that in a second. But before we do, I don't even think I said my name. I'm Brent Leary. We're going to do a few good minutes with a friend of mine shortly. But before we do that, I got to do a plug. Because in about 3 weeks from today, some of the folks in the CRM CX industry are going to descend on Atlanta, my hometown. Well, I live close enough that I call it my hometown. I'm in Metro, a little outside of the city, but hey, it's close enough. So we are going to be at the Atlanta Technology Village 3 weeks from today, March 12th. And I don't know what we're going to do. No, we're going to be doing stuff that like we did last year when we did our very first CRM Playaz IRL event, which I think stands for in real life. So it was a lot of fun. It was actually supposed to be a one and done. It was really supposed to be a CRM Playaz 15th anniversary industry kind of hangout. Wasn't supposed to be done more than once. But a funny thing happened. People actually liked it for some reason. Lots of cool people were there. Lots of folks that I see on the road when we're going to all these different events. But we wanted to have our own event where we kind of do things a little different, or we thought we tried to do things a little differently. Because we have some ideas after going to about 15, 20 events a year. We like them for the most part, but there are some things that we don't necessarily like all that much. And we thought, well, if we're ever going to do our own event, we were 15 years into this thing, so it's either now or never. And we said, yeah, we'll give it a shot. And the ironic part of this whole thing is it was a 15-year anniversary celebration, but we actually held the event very close to the 16th anniversary to the day. So anyway, that was a long way to say we're doing IRL 26, and it is a full day. It's going to be some good stuff. I think I even have a couple of quick. Okay, I got a little couple of promos there. Anybody in the industry and that has been hanging out for a while probably knows these two gentlemen. John Reed, who is the co-founder of Diginomica. And I think the Venerable Paul Greenberg nicknamed him Brohammer. I don't even know how that all came about, but I just like saying Brohammer, so that one kind of stuck. And his partner in crime, they do a monthly enterprise hits and misses show, which is really good. Really fun look at things that go right and go wrong in this space. But that's Brian Summer. Brian is a internationally known on the microphone kind of speaker, expert in a lot of different enterprise tech applications. So I'm not going to pin him down to one. But if you know anything about Brian, he's from Texas, has a really good Texas twang, tells a really good story, and he likes to use a lot of slides when he's telling his stories. And probably the most important thing is if you ever want him to come to your event, you better make sure you have a lot of Dr. Pepper on hand. That's the way we got him here. We promised him some Dr. Pepper. So that they're going to be doing the Brohammer and the Cowboy. That's what we're calling it. They can call it whatever they want, but they're doing Brohammer and the Cowboy at our event. And another quick one before I bring my guests on. If I can just get that slide. these two smiling gentlemen. They probably very well known to you if you know any, if you're involved anywhere in the space. But that's Ray Wang, who is the founder of Constellation Research, and probably if you turn on your TV to CNBC or Bloomberg or Fox Business News, there's about a 1 in 2 chance you're going to see him smiling on there, talking very fast but very smartly about stuff. And his partner in Disrupt TV. Now, Ray is not going to be there physically. He's going to be in Munich, Germany. So this is going to be the very first intercontinental edition of Disrupt TV, because his partner in crime there, Vala Afshar, who's like the chief digital evangelist at Salesforce, he will be with us right on stage. So we're going to do, for the very first time, we don't know if it's going to work or not, but we're going to give it a shot, Disrupt TV Intercontinental Edition with Ray Wang in Munich and Vala Afshar right at the Atlanta Tech Village. We'll see if this works. I'm not sure it will, but we're willing to give it a shot, because that's what the IRL event is all about: taking risks, doing things a little differently, and begging your forgiveness doesn't work. All right, let's move on, because I've known this gentleman. I can't believe how long I've known this gentleman, because we've been doing Gilmore Gang. Damn, that was before the pandemic. Woo. So I've known this guy for a long time, and he is my personal go-to guy when it comes to anything media, because he's done everything in the media. I mean, he's the people that he's worked with. I don't have enough time to give you a list, but let me just point out a couple of them. Does anybody out there in the audience, please, and I'm serious, anybody out there in the audience, first of all, if there is an audience, I shouldn't, does anybody remember the name Howard K. Smith? I mean, I equate that name. I was a little kid. I mean, I was a little kid, but I equate that to like right next to Walter Cronkite. I mean, those are that when you thought about the news, you thought about names like Cronkite, Howard K. Smith, David Brinkley, those kind of folks. He actually worked with some of these folks. He worked with Brian Williams. He worked with Tom Brokaw. He worked with Lester Holt. And those are just the NBC guys. He helped kind of kickstart the whole cable news kind of stuff, because he was involved with CNN in those early days. I wonder if he met James Earl Jones. I'll have to find out. But anyway, he's been there. He's done that. And it's not just that he has done it back in the day and helped build this stuff, but he's still very active in what's going on today. And that's why I'm so glad to have who I like to call Sir Frank Radice join me right now.
I am honored to be here on this show with you, Brent, because I begged you to put me on this show last week. I said, geez, we've been doing the Gilmore Gang for like, I don't know, 20 years now. And you've only asked me on once. No, but I really do appreciate it. It's what, you were talking about Howard K. Smith, who, interestingly enough, was one of the original Murrow's boys back during World War II. So when Edward R. Murrow was, reporting live in London during the Blitz, one of his reporters in his group was Howard K. Smith. And I actually had a chance to work with Howard at ABC News in Washington in 72, 73, maybe, going back a long time. But he wasn't the only one of Murrow's boys who was working at ABC News at the time. There was a guy there named Bill Downs, who was another one of Murrow's boys. And it was, fascinating to have gotten really dipped my toes into the journalism waters with some of the, looking back on it now, they're heroes. They covered the news the way the news was supposed to be covered, at least the way I look at it today. I think a lot of the way things are going now with news coverage, it's not quite the same. You just take a look at what's going on at CBS. I think we can get into that if you want. But that's a little Howard K. Smith comment of mine. I wanted to make sure you knew that. You also mentioned that I worked with Lester. So I kind of worked with all the anchors of NBC News from the time I got there, starting with Tom Brokaw and ending with Lester Holt.
Wow.
But at CNN, I actually had a chance to work in the field in El Salvador during the war in El Salvador with Bernard Shaw.
Wow.
Who later became the premier anchor of CNN in the early days. So I started out, my career at CNN began in 1984, 83, 84, and CNN started in I want to say 1980.
Yeah.
And I was there really early on, and I had moved already from hard news, where I had worked. The audience, both of them, have not heard of some of the stuff that I've done. But I worked at World News Tonight, and I worked at Nightly News at NBC, and I worked at Good Morning America, and I worked at the Today Show, and I worked at Nightline, which was probably the single most important job I ever had in my entire career as a journalist, because it let me cover all sorts of different kinds of stories. And it was through Nightline where I met an awful lot of the people that I ended up becoming good friends with, that had a lot to do with the formative years of my career, which has now spanned over 50 years.
Wow. That is awesome. So Ted Koppel, Nightline.
Ted, yeah, he and I used to, Nightline would start at 11:30 at night back in the beginning, and it lasted for 20. It was a 20-minute show when it started, and it was only 4 nights a week, and eventually it became a half-hour show, and it went on 5 nights a week. And we would come to work, almost everybody came to work at 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning and stayed until the show was over at midnight. 5 nights a week, and nobody who worked on Nightline from the very first day, when it was called America Held Hostage, and it was when the Iran crisis began, when the hostages were taken in Iran, and then it became Nightline less than a year after that, and it was a guy named Frank Reynolds was the anchor of the original Iran hostage crisis show, and then when Frank, I think, had gotten tired of working the 18-hour days, he said, I'm going, you got to find somebody else to do this. And they brought in Ted. And here's an ironic story about that, though. I was on the assignment desk the day the hostages were taken in 1979. And I had to call, that was my job, to pick up the phone and call the reporters and assign them to the stories, and call the camera crews and have them go in and do what it was that they were supposed to do. And I was pulling wire copy, and I was reading all about what was happening as it was happening with a desk assistant. That was it. It was just me and a desk assistant. And the first person I called was Ted Koppel. And I said, so Ted, you got to come to work. And he would say in his sort of pseudo-British accent, well, Frankie, this has already happened once before. It's going to be over in a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days. It's not going to last long. You sure? Ted, you got to come in. You're the duty correspondent at the State Department. You got to come in. You got to go to the State Department. I'll send you all the wire copy. And that was how that all started. And of course, that story went on for 555 days. And now the real ironic thing was when Nightline became a show a year into it, their telephone extension in Washington was 555. And we did not, of course, see the irony of that until the 555th day.
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
Yeah, there you go.
So you mentioned Edward R. Murrow, and then you talk Howard K. Smith, Walter Cronkite, was it Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, Frank Reynolds, these.
Yeah, those are the guys. I didn't work with Chet Huntley. I had left NBC. I started my career actually at NBC in 1972, and the thing that broke my career open from that was the night of the Saturday Night Massacre during Watergate, and I was basically the only guy in the office that night. It was another time where I was like the late duty guy, and who doing the job that absolutely nobody else wanted to do. And all of a sudden, the Saturday Night Massacre happens, and Nixon fires all these people, so in sort of a grand Trump style barrage of firings in order to literally redirect attention to something other than the crimes that were being committed or were committed and being reported by Woodward and Bernstein pretty well in the venerable Washington Post at the time. And so it was because of that I was offered a job at ABC News, where I then spent the next 17 years. So I'd spent 3 years at NBC, then 17 years at ABC, and then I went back to NBC after that 17 years and literally spent the next 8-9 years at NBC until the time I retired from that kind of work in 2008.
So, how much do you miss that? How much do you miss the media, like the way it was done back then?
I miss it today more than I've missed it since 2008. I actually thought that as I switched from journalism to marketing in 2009, 2008, 2009, I went into a different kind of world. So it was more entertainment oriented. As a whole entertainment news thing, I did some time at Entertainment Tonight, and at CNN, I was in charge of entertainment news. So I had made this switch. And I'll be honest with you, it was because I had actually gotten tired of being sent to war zones. And I said, I've been to El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala and Honduras and Panama. And that really had, those are the kinds of things they would come and they tap you on the shoulder, and you kind of knew that, your time, you'd been chosen, you had to go, and you couldn't say no. You say no, you're not working after that. So I did that for about 7 years, and I just got tired of it. And I went into entertainment news, and that was basically giving up being a journalist, even though it was entertainment news journalism. And I really, when I was at CNN, I wanted to turn entertainment news into a form of journalism. So it would require the same skills. And we would do shows that were very similar to what we were doing at Nightline and at World News Tonight, but doing it with entertainment news. And I enjoyed that. I really, I got out of news, and here I am now. I don't know, since 1984, something like that. When I left news, hard news, I now miss it now more than ever. It is something that I look back at my career, even the 20 years I spent at NBC. Pretty much the top of the sky. I never quite touched the top of the sky, but I was just like a quarter of an inch below it. And that's pretty high up in the network executive community. And the money was good, and the perks were good. And back in the 80s and the 90s, it was limos and Learjets. I'm telling you, it was something.
So talk a little bit about.
I love that, but I didn't love it as much as I now miss covering the news.
Talk a little bit about the editorial room, and because I'm curious to see what it was like then, because it definitely doesn't feel like it's like that now, especially what's going on at CBS. So tell us about like the division between like the high ups and editorial folks. How did that work back then?
So I'm going to back up a little teeny bit and say that one of my heroes in journalism during Watergate was Carl Bernstein, who ended up becoming the Washington at ABC. So I actually had a chance to work with a guy who thought about, lived, breathed, slept, ate journalism. But so did Ted Koppel, and so did all of the executive producers who ran the shows. And I can tell you that from the lowliest desk assistant all the way up to the executive producer and the anchor talent, everyone was involved in the editorial process. The final word was back in those days, was the executive producer. Nobody interfered with the editorial process. There was always, of course, what we called standards and practices, who looked at what we did and made sure that what we did was correct. But they didn't try and get involved editorial in a story. They didn't tell us that we couldn't do a story about something because the White House picked up the phone and called our bosses and said, "Hey, you can't do that story." That never, ever happened. And I've spoken to many executive producers recently, former executive producers, who said, yes, there were times when they felt that standards and practices was dipping their toes a little bit too deeply into the editorial process, but never does anyone remember an executive picking up the phone and saying, change that, don't do that. Now, we've seen this happen at CBS. Very good example was when 60 Minutes had just finished doing a story about the El Salvadorian prison or detention center for the immigrants who had been picked up off the street by ICE and then sent to this place. It's a pretty horrible place. And it was killed by the new president or the head of CBS News, a woman named Barry Weiss, who hasn't got a whole lot of journalism in her background. She had a podcast, and that podcast was bought by Paramount, who then bought CBS and put her in charge of CBS. And she told them she killed the story. Now, the reason that she says that they killed the story was because a new rule had been put out by the FCC that said if you're going to have a representative of one political party or one side of the story, you must have the other side of the story by someone equally as identifiable. The White House was unwilling to talk about this story to CBS News. They did everything they could. They, it used to be, you'd say, we invited the president to speak, but he refused, or we couldn't, they didn't answer our calls or whatever. That wasn't enough for the White House, which was embarrassed by this story. And somebody, although we don't know for sure, but somebody high up in the administration suggested to somebody either at Paramount or CBS that they kill the story. And sure enough, they killed the story. And it's not just happening at CBS. It's not just happening with the news division. Look at it. People like Colbert are having trouble because he just did an interview with a guy who's running for a congressional seat in Texas, a Democrat, and he did not offer, or he didn't get, or he didn't do an interview with the competition. In the competition, there's more than one person running for that seat, but you'd think that that he committed the most heinous crime in the world. And the thing interesting to me about this is back in the 80s, there was a mandate that said that you had to offer equal time for a newscast. But that was later gotten eliminated, mostly because of talk shows. So talk shows, all these talk shows came on, they started talking politics on the talk shows. They couldn't really enforce that. But then within the last couple of years during the Trump administrations, they reinstated it. And it's not quite the same as the fairness doctrine or the equal time rule, but it's basically saying, if you're going to talk to somebody that's a Democrat, you better talk to a Republican too. So that's created a whole bunch of issues. And so who makes the decision? Is it the president of the company that does, or is it some political force on the outside that does? And either way, if it's a decision that kills a story for any reason other than the factualness of the story, that's a word, that's wrong, at least in my mind. And back in the day, the decisions, we talked about them. We sat around what was called the rim. And the rim is a horseshoe-shaped table, which you'll find, or you would have found, at any major newspaper or any major television network news organization. And in some cases at local stations, I worked at WRC in Washington, which was very much like a network. Was an NBC station, and the rim is where the executive producer sat at the head of the rim, and then producers sat around the side of the rim, and then the editorial teams, the writers, and they sat on the other side. And when a story came through, it was discussed, it was fleshed out, and it was checked for factualness, and it was important that there was always more than one or two, and way more than one, more than two sources of a story. So I actually sort of adhere to the rule of two. So if anybody says something, the same thing twice, two people say it, that it's probably true. Well, in journalism, it was, get a backup. What's the backup? Do you have two? Do you have three? Do you have four sources telling you the same story? Then you can pretty much feel confident that that story is true. You bring it to the editorial team. The editorial team discusses it. The writer writes it, or the reporter writes it, or the correspondent writes it, or the anchor writes it, or even the executive producer writes it. And then it's looked at by a team of people. And sometimes, if there was a question about it, it went to standards and practices. Very seldom did that happen. But when there was a big question, maybe about language or about imagery, it went there. But it just didn't all of a sudden go on the air. Now, I can tell you that I'll give you an example of stuff that goes on the air without any thought. Fox News tends to report stuff. Feels like they're just pulling it out of the sky and putting it on the air. I don't know who is responsible for their editorial process, but I can tell you it's no one that knows what they're talking about. And boy, is anybody listening that came from Fox? No. So that's how it was. Now, how is it now? I don't see it being like that anymore. And I'm not in the newsroom, so I can't tell you. Somebody might, all of a sudden send a note and say, it's exactly like that, Frank. What the hell? You don't know what you're talking about. You've been out of the business for a million years. Nah, I don't think it is. Even if it is set up the same way, it's not as strict as it was when I was doing it. Boy, I sound like that old guy saying, back in the day when I was coming up in this business, we didn't do shit like that.
But you said you retired around 2008, 2009 from
full-time work.
Right.
Full-time work, meaning 7 days a week. But I became, after that, I became, first job after I retired, I became the president and chief marketing officer of the Emmys. So there's two groups of Emmys. There's the East Coast Emmy Awards and there's the West Coast Emmy Awards. They're both the same award, big statue. And the East Coast handles news, sports. So I got to hang out with a lot of your sports heroes, I'm sure. News, sports, daytime television, which is at the time was talk shows and game shows, as well as what back then there were a lot of daytime dramas on the air. There aren't anymore, but there were. Daytime television, technology was in the East Coast Emmys, and the West Coast was primarily primetime. So you would see ER and Seinfeld and those kinds of shows get Emmys on the West Coast, and you would see the newscasts and daytime programs and sports, so the Olympics. Just to digress for a moment, one of the absolute most amazing days in my life was when I had to introduce Muhammad Ali, who then handed the Lifetime Achievement Award to Dick Ebersol, who was the head of NBC Sports, on the same stage. It was an absolutely amazing moment. And I had gotten to know the champ from my days at Nightline, because he was fighting Larry Holmes in Las Vegas, and they were staying at the I believe they were staying at the Caesar's Palace, and they wouldn't do an interview with Ted Koppel in New York from the same room. So and they were right way at the top of the hotel, and so we had the wire. Back then it was wires, it wasn't microwaves. We had to put a wire up to the top into Muhammad Ali's room on one side of the hotel, and then a wire up to the top to the other side to Larry Holmes' room, so that Ted Koppel could speak to them, connect them to the cameras and the microphones. So I actually had to walk into the room when the champ was laying down in bed trying to relax the night before the fight. And I'm going, champ, sorry, mind if I come in and do some stuff? He goes, go ahead, guys, just go ahead, do it. And so I got to meet him then, and you know, he hadn't he hadn't fallen ill yet.
Mm.
I think that fight was the fight that really sort of
Yeah.
pushed him over the top, because that was when a lot of people were talking about he was taking diuretics to lose weight, and he was, you know, he didn't seem to me when I met him to be the jump spry, you know, go get him, uh,
Yeah.
float like a butterfly, sting like a bee guy. But it was still Ali, and I was way starstruck more than I think almost anyone else I'd ever met in the world,
Yeah.
including presidents and great musicians and so on.
Yeah.
But that was one of my jobs, was to run the sports Emmys, and that was an incredible thing. And I did that for a while, and then after that, I left and started my own company and began as a consultant. So I spent 3 years consulting at Univision, or Univision,
Hmm.
in which was right next to Trump's Doral golf course, by the way, which I had to drive past every day. And it was a Spanish language network, and I didn't speak Spanish, so I had to uh, suffice it to say, my job was to actually they had multiple channels, wanted to put all their marketing groups into one group and call it an agency, and I had to do that, which meant downsizing a whole lot of people, and it was really a terrible time.
Hmm.
But I had a really great time because I lived in Miami for 3 years, and I lived right off of Ocean Drive, and it was pretty spectacular. And I did that for 3 years, and then I went and worked for TiVo for a little while when TiVo was, you know, young, and I blew that because I said to the head of TiVo, I said, you know how many TiVos there are out there? There's millions of TiVos out there. TiVo it's like Kleenex. It's a word that everybody, even if you have some other brand of digital recorder, everyone calls it a TiVo. I think you should turn this TiVo thing into its own network and start networking programs to the millions of people who own TiVo. And the owner said to me, well, that's not our business plan. See ya. And I was gone.
Wow.
It's funny too, because next week I'll be in New York for the 100th anniversary of NBC, and he'll be there, as will the guy that ran Univision, as will the guy that was my boss at NBC when I was in charge of marketing on the East Coast for NBC, as will many of the executives that I worked with at NBC back in the day. And I intend to ask him, so how did that TiVo thing go for you?
Man, all right. So let me ask you a couple questions. So you kind of left what, you know, the traditional part of what you were doing around 2008, 2009. That was like right before really social media took off. And
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing.
yeah.
I had gone to the NBC News board, and I said, "Look, it was 2007 actually when it really started taking off, with when Facebook and Twitter started to happen." And I went to the NBC board, the news board, and I said, "Look, it's important that you guys get involved in this social media thing, Facebook and Twitter, right now. You need to do this right now." And what I got was, well, you know, Frank, if you want to do that, if you want to take that over and do the social media thing, I said, yeah, but I'm in the marketing group. You want me to do the news coverage and social media? I don't know that that's the right thing. I'll use it as a tool to market the programs, but you know, I shouldn't be responsible for the editorial content of news going out on social media. Nobody knew how important it was yet.
Hmm.
And they said, you know what, just go ahead and give it a shot. So like, it's 2000, so like 2 years later, year and a half later, I get a call to come down to the news board meeting, and they said to me, "Hey, what do you know about this social media stuff?" And I said, "I told you guys 2 years ago that you needed to be doing it." Well, who's doing it? I said, "I told you guys 2 years ago that I was going to do it." And they went, "Oh, not anymore." And they took the social media stuff away from my department, and you know, that's sort of become history. I don't know that anyone that may be listening to this show happened, but damn, that's what happened. So yeah, there's my social media story with NBC News.
Yeah. So I mean, we're in an era now where it feels like I'll have to be really honest. I can't remember the last time I watched a network evening news program. I I tend to get my information. I'm not saying it's like 100% value checked and all that kind of stuff, but I tend to get it from right now YouTube, and I tend to get it from folks like the Midas Touch and like the Brian Tyler Cohens and the David Packmans, and it feels like I am definitely not alone with this, and it almost feels like the days of the like the Howard K. Smiths and the bro calls and all. Are they dead and buried? Or do you see any like a return to that style with with networks ever coming back? Because it feels like it's getting further and further away from that.
So I sort of in a broad stroke, I will say no, the networks are not going away. They still average 4 to 5 million viewers a night. So that's 30 million viewers a week. That's a really good number. And to the advertising community, they will look at that and say there's a very specific audience that watches those programs still. They're very old people. And that's why if you'll watch a nightly news broadcast, and there's some good ones. Although I can only name a couple of the anchors. David Muir at ABC and Tony Docupool at CBS. And honestly, I don't think they're going to go away, but I think that they are diminished. They are diminished exactly by the things that you were just talking about. Probably YouTube first, because all of those people that you talked about, whether it's Brian Tyler Cohen or David Packman or Jack Cocciarello, or any of those, they're all putting their stuff on YouTube. So you're even though you're getting their information, you may see it come up on as a notification on your phone that it's Brian Tyler Cohen. But when you click on it, it's going to be a YouTube clip that's playing back. So that makes the argument that our good friend Evan Shapiro makes, is that YouTube is TV now. And that's, I'll be honest with you, I'm exactly the same as you are. I haven't seen I haven't seen one of those programs at all in years. And I even though I'm here in London, which you didn't mention, even though I'm here in London and have been for some years now, I use YouTube TV with a VPN to watch American news. And I find myself constantly watching CNBC almost all the time. It's literally my background music next to, when I'm playing Prince or Sade. Other than that, it's CNBC. And we have the BBC here. The BBC is way different than trying to watch one of the evening newscasts. It comes on at about the same time here as it would in America. The BBC is a well-respected, trusted by almost everybody, young and old. And there's no commercials. So it's not about who it is that they're aiming this show at. And who the audience is. It's not a matter of counting the numbers of people that watch it, although they do, but it's really more about, hey, you know what? If you own a TV, you pay a license here, and if you're paying a license, you get the BBC, and hey, why not? So you watch the BBC, and the BBC has the most incredible online presence in a thing called the iPlayer, which has all of BBC Sports and all of BBC News, plus all of the BBC entertainment programs that you could ever want. And then all of these people clip at BBC to YouTube. Again, YouTube is TV. I have an argument about that it's not, but it's mostly a financial argument more than it is, and a production argument more than it is a how many people watch TV or YouTube. YouTube has huge dominance in terms of viewership over television, except for when those programs are big live sporting events or gigantic entertainment programs. So the Oscars, the Emmys, the Grammys, the Super Bowl, the Olympics. There's now even those things have a huge YouTube presence. So imagine when you can have 128 million people watching the Super Bowl, and 50, 60 million of them. I mean, look, even that Super Bowl halftime show that wasn't the one on the Super Bowl had 50 million viewers online. The online audience is simply bigger. Why? Everyone has a phone. Everyone, if they're not watching it on their phone or on their iPad, they're watching it on their television because they're throwing it to their television via something like a Chromecast, or they've got an app in their TV, because almost all TVs are smart TVs now. Let's face it. That'll allow them to watch YouTube on their television. So YouTube is TV, and it doesn't produce programs, but it doesn't need to produce programs.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that the longer form programs are starting to make a bigger position play on YouTube than a couple or 3 years ago. When YouTube started, it was all user generated content. And there was a guy that I worked with at NBC who left his job at NBC as the head of sales to go to this brand new company called YouTube to run it. He invited me and a bunch of people from NBC to come down and pitch us YouTube. And we all went down there and we went, yeah, what do we need this for? We get 30 million viewers. Not back then, the news would have gotten 30 million viewers a night. A show like Seinfeld or ER, any of those entertainment shows back in the 80s were getting huge numbers. And they certainly didn't need it back then. So instead of being forward thinking, like I was trying to get them to be, they blew it off at that time. Of course, they eventually came around to it, kind of like my story about the news and social media. They blew it off. They didn't see it for what it would become. And what it has become is clearly the dominant video distribution program available today.
Yeah, I think I have, if I can find them, a couple of slides to talk about that. Let me see if I can bring these up. Global reach right now. These are YouTube. This comes right from YouTube. 2.85 billion monthly active users, over 122 million people who use the site daily. And this is not the YouTube TV. This is the YouTube side of the house.
YouTube, yeah.
And then the last one, TV dominance. Over 1 billion hours of that daily watch time now happens on television screens. Before, I think everybody was thinking most of everything was gravitating towards mobile, but we like big screens when we're at home and watching stuff. And apparently, we're watching a lot of user-generated stuff on YouTube as much, if not even more so, than the professional production quality stuff that you traditionally used to see just on like 3 or 4 networks.
I would argue that that's what switched the sort of the framing format of how you shot content with your phone from vertical to horizontal. So a horizontal image will fill the screen on a TV set now that's the shape of the screen, and a vertical image gives you these big black bars on either side. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why I don't think this new trend towards what's called micro dramas is going to make that big a deal, because micro dramas are traditionally, it's only been a year or so, shot vertically, and people do want to see their content on a TV set. Well, look, even homemade user generated content looks really good on a high end television set. I can tell you, because I love cat videos, and I watch cat videos on my big TV because I'm throwing them there on the Chromecast, or I'm watching them on the YouTube app. But if actually scrolling through my phone and see something really cool, I can easily just press the button that sends it to the Chromecast, and it appears on my TV set, which it says to me the Chromecast is an absolutely incredible device. And who owns Chromecast? Let me think. It's Google.
I was actually I watch a lot. I think YouTube is my main watch, and it's not YouTube TV. It's YouTube.
YouTube.
And one of the things I don't even know why I gravitated towards watching this, but it's this guy who I think he rents all these like exotic looking cars, and then he goes out like one of the big cities, and he sees somebody he's attracted to, and then he'll like walk up and try to talk to the person, and he'll never say he has this like Lamborghini or anything. He just tries to talk to him, and then 9 times out of 10, the person is going to be like, yeah, all right, I got stuff to do. I'm going. And then he'll say, well, okay, I'll thanks. I'll see you later. Then they'll see him go into his car. And 9 times out of 10, they come racing back. And it's like, it's not meant to be like a traditional TV show, but I actually have started to treat it like that. I showed it to my sister, and she, like within days, she was like, I don't even watch regular TV. I just watch this guy. And I think there's a lot of that going on.
There is.
And I think partially, and we talked a little bit about this on the Gilmer Gang, is it's not just about user generated content. It's about people using this as a forum to create their own programming and use that YouTube as the channel. I think Steve called it user generated something, but it was to the effect of it's just not about the watching, it's about the creation and being able
Absolutely.
to create
Well,
your
it's
own
not.
event.
It's not just about the creation. It's about the creativity. Does it present something to you that is interesting enough for you to stop doing what you're doing and pay attention to it? So it's the attention economy as much as it is the creative economy and the creator economy. There's something that you and I both do, I know, and that is watching people watching music videos, which I get such a huge kick out of, because somebody will play a song from the 70s, and there'll be a young guy or gal on the right side of the screen. All of a sudden, you'll hear the opening lick from Sweet Home Alabama, and the guy will go, his mouth will drop open, his eyes will get really wide, and you're just watching other people watch music. And listen to music that they've never heard before is really entertaining to me. There is a part of my career that we didn't talk about, which was the very earliest days I was a musician, and I started playing professionally in 1966 and played professionally until about 1980. Even though I was working during the day, I was playing at night in bars and clubs and just all sorts of different types of venues in the Washington, D.C. area, and play and still record, and to watch people discover the music that I grew up with that they'd never heard before. I mean, I was watching something where this young girl was watching, had never heard of the Eagles and never listened to the Eagles, and she just couldn't stop watching them and listening to them when when it was addressed to her on YouTube. So there's that kind of stuff. There's just interesting content that is entertaining to me. Like I said, there's this guy who has 5 cats. And he does the voices for each of the 5 cats, and he makes these little clips of these 5 cats talking to him, and it's so creative and so funny and so interesting that if I see one of his clips, I don't care what I'm doing, I will stop and watch it, and I'll throw it up on the screen and watch it on television. It's about whether or not somebody's giving you things that you want. Look, in terms of news content on social media and on YouTube, you have to be careful about it. There's one of the things that you can do, which sort of goes around the idea of a newsroom that checks and rechecks stories content, is that you can check and recheck a story's content by searching for it on Google, or even searching for it using an AI. We can talk about how AI is impacting the entertainment and the news business, if you like, but it allows you to be your own newsroom. Not only are you a journalist with your camera going out and shooting stuff and interviewing people, and Brian Tyler Cohen, who's a very smart guy, you know, doing a piece to camera of his original reporting, or even if he's interviewing somebody. Those are all really good. But if you really want to know that what you're watching and what you're hearing about is true, you can search for the truth. I don't think anyone who watches Fox searches for the truth. Otherwise, why would they continue to watch Fox? There's a pattern here with what I'm talking about. But you can search for the truth and make sure that what you're watching and listening to is true. And that may have an awful lot to do with why some of these groups like Midas Touch. I know Steve is not a huge fan of Midas Touch, but Midas Touch is really good, I think. And it's made up of people who are really smart and really care. And when I search for the truth around them, I can tell you honestly, they're as far as I know, almost always right. I can't even think of a time when they reported something that was wrong. There's also ways that things are being produced that you may or may not like. For example, Jack Cocciarella, very smart guy, but I think he wastes too much time getting to the point at the headline. So he'll headline a story, and then he'll take the first 3 or 4 minutes talking about other stuff that's tangential to the story until he gets to the point of the story. As much as I like him, I find that that's hard for me to bear. I want, if you're going to give me a headline, take me right to the story. But that's just me, because he still has 50 or 60,000 followers regularly, and that's a really good number. Look, a really good number is 7 million, like Midas Touch. They've just reached pretty high numbers. And even NBC and ABC and CBS, they all have their own YouTube channels, and they have their own online presence, and they're, I'm assuming, have the same editorial background being put into their content distribution and stuff that you consume on their sites, so that it's true. I think that that's the most important thing when it comes to watching anything online. Is it true?
Yeah.
And if you feel that it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Do you feel like the kind of the traditional networks feel like they are in competition with the kind of the Midas Touch kind of folks? And how do they square up against them?
Well, I don't know. The answer, the honest answer is, because I'm not there anymore, I don't know. And maybe I'll know after I go to this event next week and speak to some of these people and come back to you and say, you know what, this is what I heard. That because there's going to be a lot of news executives at this event, and but I would say that if they aren't, they're fools. But I know they're not fools. So my guess is they are. And what are they doing to combat this? They're creating their own online presence, and they're using YouTube, and they're using the tools that are out there, and they have teams of people whose responsibility is to figure out what the next step in the evolution of distribution and content distribution is.
Do they need to have the different brands? Because to a lot of younger generation folks, certain brands they'll never gravitate towards, but maybe possibly if they use a different name and use these different kind of channels and different formats and think maybe they'll stand a better chance than doing it under the helm of that. Like CNN. Remember when they did CNN Plus? It was terrible. It just didn't come across. It felt like they were just putting a plus after everything that they typically do, as opposed to doing things differently.
Well, I have a funny story about that. First of all, I agree with you. I think that if you created a new brand but distributed the content that was different, as opposed to creating a new brand for content that you already have, that will turn people off. People will know that they're being fooled. And they will gravitate away from it. But if you create a new brand that has a different kind of content, that is the Midas Touch Network or David Pakman or those things that we've already discussed. People hadn't heard of it before, but they started to get to like it, and then they gravitated to it. That works. And I think that that's what the way the networks should be thinking. But I can tell you, I don't think that's how they're thinking. I think that they're trying to put lipstick on the pig.
Mm.
When I was at MSNBC and I was in charge of marketing MSNBC, there was we got to change. MSNBC was originally started as a joint venture between Microsoft and NBC, because at the time there was the ability, or everyone thought that it would be easy to put the content on NBC online. But when it started, the fastest modem was like 24 baud. It took you an hour and a half to download a picture, let alone a video. So it was pretty much the idea of trying to connect online and on air at the time sounded great, but it simply didn't work. And that threw a lot of people for a loop. And it was very difficult to get things going in the beginning because that was the brand. So eventually, MSNBC became more NBC than MS. There was a newsroom in Redmond. It was a full blown, honest to God, like a professional newspaper slash video slash online newsroom. It lived in the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington.
I've been
And
there.
they were separate, even though it was MSNBC and there was a joint EC, and they didn't work together. And I always thought that that was a real big mistake. But at one time during all of that, the president of NBC or MSNBC said, "We're going to change the name." So we hired this wonderful company that did that. They would do these huge focus groups, and they would come back and they would take all the stakeholders and put them in a room, and then they put up the names that people had thrown into the hat. And after 3 or 4 days of constantly trying to figure out, what could we rename NBC, MSNBC. The number one choice was, I had nothing to do with this, Frank. That was the number one choice.
Like
And
morning Frank.
like Frank News, or I'll be frank with you. And I remember just sort of, God, pulling myself into the corner of the room and saying, this is not my choice. I had nothing to do with this. This is it. And by the way, I think it's absolutely the stupidest name in the world. By the way, there's a network here in the UK called Frank. And I just, and I said, well, what are we going to do that will be different? If whatever we call it, if it's called Frank, what are we going to do that's going to, well, our content will be Frank. And I went, well, okay. And so how is that different from what it is right now? Are you saying that the interviews that the wonderful anchors that we have, whether it's Tim Russert or Brian, because the other way we marketed it was the news you need from the people you know. And that was Russert and Brian Williams and, just some of the stars in NBC. Even Brokaw had a show. Jane Pauley had a show. I mean, how much different will it be? And there wasn't any thought being given to how the name would be applied to the brand, but which is a way that I thought that's the way that sort of the old-fashioned way of thinking about it. We'll just change the name and more people will come that are younger. That's not exactly what happened. Actually, that's not what happened at all. And in the end, we didn't change the name. Now, look what they did when Microsoft pulled out. They kept MS in the name. Microsoft was bought out by NBC, yet they still called it MSNBC because that was a brand that they believed people understood. Mm. And by now, of course, it's easy to get it online. And but then when NBC created Versant and separated NBC News from MSNBC, they had to change the name. And they kept the MS part of it because I think people had forgotten what the MS meant. I believe, but they knew, because if you think about it, when people were talking about MSNBC as a place where they were getting their news, they'd say, "I got it on MS last night." So they kept the MS part of it, and then they added that Now thing. So MS Now News. I don't know what it means. News, offensive, whatever. They changed the name. But they didn't change what MSNBC was. So what you see on MSNBC now is basically what
Yeah,
on
Miss
MS
now.
Now is basically what MSNBC was a year ago. So I think that what I'm saying is I think that the current generation of people who are running these organizations are not thinking about differently. Now, that being said, I think CBS is trying to think differently with Barry Weiss, but I think that it's unfortunate that it's changing what was once the Tiffany News Network into something entirely different. I almost felt like, wow, why didn't they try and do some interim thing or have a separate company or, but here, don't change CBS News drastically overnight, which is what they did. And CBS News has been hemorrhaging viewers. And by hemorrhaging viewers, that means they hemorrhage advertising dollars, which means they are losing money more than in the early days when I started in the business. News was a loss leader. It didn't generate any revenue. It was something that you had to do in order to maintain a license. Well, you don't need a license in the networks anymore. The licenses only belong to the local stations, not to the networks. And then this guy named Roone Arledge decided, who at the time was the head of ABC Sports and had done the agony of defeat promo marketing campaign, said, why aren't we marketing news the way we market sports? Why don't we do that? I'm not talking about changing the news, but why don't we market it the same way? And part of it was you never saw a promo on the networks for news because news was a loser. When Roone came in as the president of sports and then became the president of news, he says, we're gonna start marketing news and promote news. And the next thing you know, ABC News was generating revenue. It had never generated revenue before. Roone Arledge came in, the next thing you know, it's generating revenue. A few years later, it's generating millions of dollars in revenue, which it had never done before. And the other networks saw it and started doing the same thing. And that's how news went from being, Edward R. Murrow and Howard K. Smith, and everybody watched it just because it was the only thing that was on, and you didn't need to promote it or market it.
Yeah.
And consequently, the advertisers were not spending a whole lot of money on it. Once you started marketing it and the numbers went up, the advertisers had to spend more to buy time on the shows, and that's how the generated revenue became really big. And that's where it is. That's where it was. I think those numbers are starting to dip. I don't think those numbers are starting to dip. Back then everyone watched it. Now old people watch it. So you'll see an ad for drugs, medicine, or you'll see an ad for Medicare, or you'll see an ad for stuff that old people do. And since I don't watch it, I'm not sure what it is that old people do, because you don't look at me as an old person.
Hey,
So
Frank,
there you go.
this is great. But I want to get your take on. I want to get your take on what do you see happening over the next year or so?
Oh, well, I think the biggest story of the week is the AI created fight between Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise.
Wow.
I don't know if you've seen that video.
Yep, saw it.
But it is equally as good as something that was shot on IMAX with multiple angles, beautiful sound effects, terrific music. It's a 15-second clip, and I'm telling you, if you're in the film business, you're going to look at that, and that's going to shake you up. And I think that in the entertainment world, that's the single most important thing that's happened in recent memory, and it's because of AI. Look, I'm not against AI. I think AI is an absolutely magnificent tool used the right way, and that it's regulated so that people who are in the industry aren't going to lose too much. They're certainly going to lose money because of it, but aren't going to lose too much because of it. There's an economy attached to making film and television that's way more than just the guy who writes it or the woman who directs it or the camera crews. There's There's everything from, the infrastructure around it, from the people who drive the trucks to the people who move the props to the people who build the scenery to the people who cater to there's just this, to the people who fly the stars in and out, to the people who, the lawyers and the doctors and just this gigantic system that wraps around making movies and television, which, by the way, is not there when it comes to user-generated content. It's a guy in a camera, and those are all affected by AI. AI can write a script. Look, I've done it. I actually took some lengthy notes on a feature that I was working on with someone, and I threw it into AI, and it came out with a screenplay. Wow. It wasn't great, but the issue there is it wrote the screenplay way better than I could have, and all I had to do was go back in and edit it. I wanted to make graphic designs of what the poster art would look like. You describe that into the AI, and boom, it came up. And then I wanted to do, 4 or 5 little, because the longest you could do before the new ByteDance apps started to happen was like 3 to 5 seconds. Now, this piece on ByteDance with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt is 15 seconds long. Think about it. Unless you're talking about really long shots, that's about how long a shot is in a movie or a television show before it cuts to another shot. Actually, it's a number of shots, but it's a 15-second sequence that was described in words and then came out in a piece of video. So I think that Hollywood is going to be is turning itself inside out right now because of that video. They saw it coming. There's also the Writers Guild was already complaining about people losing jobs because of it, and you better make sure that they're protected. The voiceover people already had things written into their contracts. The actors are worried about it because it can create and generate your image, and they own their image, or their lawyers and their agents own their image. But you don't own their image, yet you can then use their image to, and then there's the bad stuff that's happening, like creating content that's, overtly sexual, which is, really horrible, and it's bad for people's health and all of that. Those are the problems, just one of the myriad of problems of AI. But AI is good too, because it can help to create things. It can be a tool if used by the right people in the right hands. I've seen some great editors that I know in Hollywood who are not working that much right now, creating the most amazing AI stuff you've ever seen in your life. And I watch a lot of it on YouTube, and many of my friends who are creating it are posting them on YouTube and then reposting them on their Facebook pages or on their LinkedIn pages so that we in the community can see them, because we're part of that community. So I see that particular thing. And by the way, if you subscribe to my newsletter, which is called the Radice Files, comes out every Friday, 1 o'clock in the morning, Friday morning, in London. So sometime in the evening in America on Thursday. That's the headline of my stories for tomorrow. It's the first story in the Radice Files, and it basically describes the panic that's happening in Hollywood because of AI. Now, let's associate AI to news for a minute. An AI story in news will seem just as newsworthy as a non-AI story, and it may not be true. And the one thing that AI will allow you to do as it gets more and more complicated is to check the validity of an AI story. And the funny thing is, you can use AI to check AI. And I think that people haven't gotten that much into it yet to know that. AI is becoming the new search engine. Google is becoming AI. You can ask it with your voice, and it will give you an AI search and come back with a complete story that's been AI. Sources, which is how AI works, and put it together and then presented it to you. But you can also just simply normally Google something, and you might get a completely different story. Now, what's right? At this point, I would say the non-AI story is probably the first thing that I would do to check something, which is what I would do in a news story. Is I wouldn't necessarily believe that the AI was right. Now, I believe in AI, so who's right and who's wrong here? I think it's going to take some time for all of this to flesh out, but I think that right now, the idea of being able to manipulate imagery and copy and voices and background sounds and everything basically by typing out a few words of copy and not having to code it and having it be coded for you and come back with a piece of video that just blows you away. I think that is what will turn Hollywood upside down.
And you mentioned your newsletter. A lot of the things that we talked about when it comes to video and broadcast and all that, same thing is going on with the written word, and we all kind of know what's going on with places like the Washington Post. It's any kind of media is being completely, I don't want to say completely disrupted, but impacted by what's going on. And just that we talked about how YouTube is TV. It's also kind of radio too, or because YouTube is now the most frequently used service for listening to podcasts in the US as well. So lots of stuff going on, and it seems to me that you're just as passionate now about what's going on as you were when you were actually in the mix.
You know, it's important to maintain a level of understanding, for me anyway, of all of these things. And you know, you're absolutely right. Newsletters seem to be replacing newspapers. Many of the journalists who I respected in newspapers and in journalism on television have gravitated to newsletters. Paul Krugman is an example of a great journalist who has gone to the newsletter world. Robert Reich, who is a former cabinet member, has gravitated to it. A lot of people at the networks have moved over to newsletters now. Newsletters like Substack allow you to do video. So a lot of these people now do video into their newsletters. And now there's a thing called Substack TV, which will air whatever length of your program is on that Substack TV channel, which you can get on Google by using Google, the Chromecast, to get to it. And I find myself, by the way, listening to music all the time on my Alexa device, which will search out whether the music is often it'll be a video, because it's a video Alexa, and it'll come from YouTube, and it'll have the same high quality audio that, you know, it's not like a Macintosh. I don't mean Macintosh, the computer. I mean Macintosh quality VL speakers and a high end turntable, but it sounds really good. And it's coming from YouTube, and it's coming on an Alexa device, which, by the way, is another Google device. So no wonder Google is part of the Magnificent Seven.
All right, Frank, this has been awesome. This is really only supposed to be 30 minutes, but man, it was so good. I had to let it go because it was really fun watching you talk about the stuff from your perspective, because you have a unique perspective that AI can't even replicate at this point. So thanks, Frank. And once again,
how do you know I'm not?
Yeah, you could.
Well, me, you think about it. Did you ever see what was the name of that show with the character who was an avatar? It was
not Max Headroom.
Max Headroom.
Jeez.
Think about it.
That was a long time ago when they were doing it.
I mean, that was so before its time. And that was so. Anyway, thank you very much, Brent. I appreciate it. You know, I know I had to cajole you into putting me on, but hey, no, I enjoyed it.
No, I literally, Paul and I have been. I think it was like the last couple of weeks. We're like, how come we haven't had Frank? Because we had you on.
Look, I would love. Oh, it's been a lot more than that. I would love to be in Atlanta for your show. I think that sounds so fantastic. I mean, I'm a little, actually, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit worried about coming back
in.
to America because I haven't been back for a year. And one of the things that the administration has said, if you're a dual citizen and you haven't been back for 6 months, we're going to look at your American citizenship. Well, I've been an American citizen for like 75 years.
Yeah.
So you know what? You're not going to mess with me. However, I don't know what's going to happen, and I hope to God they're not listening to them. Anyway,
I think there's a good shot that they aren't.
Oh, here we go. Trump is addressing the Prince Andrew story. Oh my God!
Oh,
you know what he's going to do, don't you? He's going to attack Iran in an effort to try and get people's attention away from the Epstein story. That's
sounds like
me.
Wag the dog. All right, Frank. Really, thank you for taking the time to do this. I think I'll be talking to you. I think next Sunday. I think we're
Sunday.
ramping back up.
We're doing the show.
So if you wanted more of Frank, you'll get Frank. You'll get Keith Tier. You'll get Tina Gilmore. You'll get, of course, Steve Gilmore, and I'll be there listening to all this stuff because it's always great. But anyway, check out the Gilmore Gang. Is it 2 p.m. Eastern on Sunday?
Yeah,
I think it is. All right. So we'll put a link up for that, Frank. So thanks to Frank. Thanks to y'all. I just want to go and take watch the recording of this because there's a lot of good stuff in there. So anyway, thanks to you for a few more good minutes, a little more than a few good minutes, a few good more minutes. Thanks again, and I will see you next time. See ya.
Thanks a lot, brother.